once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will really from the hillside, walk together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys, and really once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
Good evening, everybody. And for the first time in another week, in a while, we are back with Uncut History. How is everybody doing? We took a bit of a break. Not that I wanted to take a break, but college demanded it. Just give me the funny paper, you academic system. I need to get out. I need to get out. I'd rather educate people here on the interwebs. Please, I want to do it more often. Okay. I'm done ranting about college. How is everybody doing tonight? We are in October. Autumn is in full swing here in Pennsylvania, which means all of the crazy fall festivals are in full swing, which means I am going to stay as far away from it as possible because I do not do well in festival environments. Sorry to be a party pooper. Every festival in Western Pennsylvania gets blown sky high out of proportion. And all they have, instead of nice, soothing acoustic music and warm, pumpkin flavored, who knows what, you end up with endless heaps of traffic. Everybody is being a rude mother. I'm not going to say that word. We're not going to say on the stream that early. So yeah, not a big fan of fall festivals. And there's one happening near me right now. So I am hunkering in. Remember that thing they were using, the shelter in place term a few years ago? Well, I use that whenever there's a fall festival near me. I shelter in place from the fall festivals. That little rant out of the way, we do have a subject tonight. We do have a big subject tonight. And you maybe wonder what the title, what on earth was Dunmores War? And when I say Dunmores War, I'm referring to Lord Dunmore's War, which was a very, very short conflict that occurred in 1774 that had big ramifications, particularly for the Ohio River Valley, but also for the British American colonies, as well as numerous indigenous tribes. What was this war all about? That's what tonight's stream is all about. And I think I chased everybody off. Did I chase everybody off with my rant, my earlier rant about all the wonders of fall festivals? Yeah, people don't like me being a party pooper, I suppose. Well, I guess we won't hesitate any longer. Let's dive into Lord Dunmore's War. So it's 1774. Well, actually, before we get to the events of 1774, we need to explain the fallout of the 7 Years' War in North America. See, there was a little thing in the 1750s where the two biggest empires in the world, Britain and France, decided to go to war across the whole planet. It was a world war on equal territorial scale of the world wars you often hear about in the 20th century. Pitting Britain, France, and both sides, many lists of allies that I don't have time to list here. The Europeans called it the 7 Years' War. It really went on for a whole decade in North America. The flashpoint was over control of the Ohio River Valley because whoever controlled it, the British or the French, would decide what empire would have dominance in North America. I have many videos on Readout Productions that'll go all the more in detail about the French and Indian War, and that's on our main focus tonight. Spoiler alert, Britain won this conflict. They kicked France out of North America, at least east of the Mississippi, they kicked them out. And Britain now has control of everything between the eastern Atlantic seaboard to the Mississippi River, including that lovely Ohio River Valley. Now, in order to win this war, the British had to rely heavily upon their American colonists. There was about 1 million of them living in the 1750s, and they're going to make up a good portion of the British ranks. So a lot of the labor that went into the British war force in North America was not from people in Europe, but from people in the British colonies. And a lot of these colonists hoped when the war was over, they would receive land grants, and they would have first dibs over settlement in the Ohio River Valley. Also, to win this war, the British had to get smart, and learn how to cooperate with the people actually living in the Ohio River Valley, the various indigenous tribes. The British were not that great at the start of the war at diplomacy, but boy, when wars happen, you tend to innovate very quickly. And the British innovated their Indian departments. So by the end of the war, they had gotten some shaky alliances, most notably with the Iroquois Confederacy, the Six Nations, which were centered in present-day New York. So when the war ends, the British have a problem. They have agreed to many different terms with many different tribes over how the Ohio River Valley should be protected. But they've also kind of implied to a lot of these colonists who are serving in the war, you're going to get all this land to settle. You can't have colonists rush into the valley that is inhabited by already many, many groups of people. So in 1763, to try to have a stopgap, King George III imposed what was known as the Proclamation of 1763. And in short, he told everybody there is a lovely arbitrary line running along the Appalachian mountain range that for the time being will divide colonial America from indigenous America. Now, it was not the intention of the king to make this boundary permanent. It was more so, hey, everybody chill, breathe, stop killing each other. I got to sort all this out. This paperwork's going to take time to go through. The colonists didn't see that as such. And many key figures who had formed these land companies, basically that were like armed real estate agencies in the 18th century, had for several decades now already had claims in the Ohio River Valley. And since the war is over, they want it now. And they're not waiting for the king to lift that arbitrary line. So you're going to have people going across that line and starting to squat in the Ohio River Valley. And wouldn't you know it, they end up getting attacked because they're trespassing on people's property, these various tribes. Eventually, by 1768, British officials and certain tribes have reached an agreement to a proper boundary. And it's going to look a little bit like this. If I can go back to my slideshow. Here we are. It's going to be involving can't speak at the moment. It's going to involve the Treaty of Fort Stanwick, the Treaty of Lochaber. Wait, what did I do? No, Treaty of Hard Labor, Treaty of Fort Stanwick. Lochaber, we'll get to you in one moment. So in New York, you had the head of Indian Affairs in the northern colonies. That was William Johnson. He's photographed in the top left corner. For the southern colonies, the British had their superintendent of Indian Affairs being a guy by the name of A. John Stewart. I can't find a portrait for him, so I put a silhouette. Johnson's going to communicate with the Iroquois Confederacy, the Six Nations up in New York. Stewart's going to communicate with the Cherokee people living adjacent to the British southern colonies. Now, what you have to understand is Johnson basically was the end-all, be-all when it came to British indigenous affairs in the mid-18th century. You had to go through him, but he's not speaking to all of them, though he thinks he is. And the Six Nations also believe they speak for all the people in the Ohio River Valley. Spoiler alert, they don't. So Johnson and the Six Nations are going to orchestrate what's known as the Treaty of Fort Stanwick. And Stewart is going to go to the Cherokee Nation, and he's going to talk to individuals such as the Little Carpenter, Attakulla, who that's not obviously not a photograph of Attakulla, but that is a living historian interpreting Attakulla in the bottom right-hand corner. So men like Attakulla are going to meet with men like Stewart, and they're going to negotiate a proper boundary between the southern British colonies and the Cherokee people. That boundary is going to go from the Ohio River down the Kanawha River. This be roughly where Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and boy, Point Pleasant could be very important in our story today, not just because of boundaries. So this Treaty of Hard Labor between the southern colonies and the Cherokee mark a boundary along the Kanawha River, where the Treaty of Fort Stanwick is going to have the Six Nations and the northern colonies agree to, well, a bit of an arbitrary line coming down from central New York, down the Appalachian Mountains, cutting a hard left across modern-day western Pennsylvania till it hits the Ohio River, and it'll follow the Ohio River. The problem is This one does not end at the Kanawha River. No. The Treaty of Fort Stanwick kept going and going and going and going until it finally reached the Tennessee River. And then that would be the western flank of this new boundary between colonial America and indigenous America. Safe to say that the Cherokee were not too enthused by this because that took a huge part of their land away. So another treaty had to be organized to tweak it. And that would be the Treaty of Lochaber in 1770. Are you confused yet? Don't worry, it gets worse. So in 1770, the Southern Indian Affairs Department, they're going to meet up with the Cherokee once more at Lochaber. And now the official boundary between colonial America and indigenous America is going to run from central New York down the Appalachian Mountains, then make a hard left turn over to the Ohio River, follow the Ohio River all the way till it makes an arbitrary line, kind of fall into Kentucky and Holston rivers, but it's not exact. That was the new official boundary, which meant good news for all those armed land agency groups like the Ohio Company that, hey, those land claims you have around Pittsboro, that you have on the eastern side of the Ohio River, that is legal to settle now. The problem was that you notice I was talking about the Six Nations, the Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois Confederacy. There's you know my rant about how many different names we got to use. Every time any name you use to refer to an indigenous tribe, somebody gets upset. So Six Nations, we're just calling them the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee people. We're calling them the Six Nations on this channel. I apologize if that upsets anybody. It's for simplicity's sake. The Six Nations are the main indigenous body that the British Empire negotiate with in the northern colonies. And like I said, Johnson, who had all the favor of the Six Nations, such as a Joseph Brant, who has an image underneath Johnson, the Six Nations claim to represent all of these people in the Ohio country, around the Ohio River Valley, that they had brought them in and that they were going to provide them protection, all these other disparate groups of people. But they really didn't have a vocal presence in these Six Nations in the Longhouse. They may be there at gatherings, but they were often drowned out by the original Six Nations, and that'll wash along. And these smaller groups, these smaller clusters I'm talking about are such as the Shawnee and the Delaware and the Mingo. The Delaware and the Mingo people, first of all, the Mingo, they are similar cultural to the Six Nations. They're also Iroquoian, but the Mingo, they don't want to be part of the Six Nations. It's too imperial for their liking. They want to have something smaller scale, stick to their own villages, be a small, close-knit community. So the Mingo shares some values as the Six Nations, but they want to be left alone. So they interact with the Six Nations from time to time, but they would rather be left to their own devices. The Delaware are not Iroquois. They're Algonquian speaking. They're a very different culture. And the Delaware have found themselves stuck under the authority of the Six Nations for a number of decades now. There was massive wars in the 17th century between the Iroquois, the Six Nations, and various Algonquian groups. And the Six Nations won this conflict and essentially had come in and put these smaller groups that have been defeated under their authority. Again, under their protection, we're going to represent you. We're going to make sure that you're taken care of, but we're the bosses now. We're the captain now here in the Ohio River Valley. So the Delaware really did not like that. They had tried to broker treaties with the British by themselves during the 7 Years' War, but it didn't work out for them. So they're kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place. So the Delaware and the Mingo, they're not really well represented in these treaties. And then there's the Shawnee. The Shawnee have no involvement with the Six Nations. They have no involvement with them. They are their own entity. They're their own civilization. They want to be as far away from European influence as possible. They just want to be left alone. They've moved pretty far deep into the Ohio country, deep down the Ohio River Valley. They're trying to get as far away. Every time they relocate, the colonists just keep rearing their ugly heads. And they don't like these other tribes taking away their land, essentially. Because this new boundary that the Cherokee and that the Six Nations have agreed to give over to the colonies. Well, the reason they do it is because it doesn't really impact them. It does. It's hunting grounds. It's also hunting grounds for the Shawnee. And since the Shawnee are not involved with the Six Nations, they can just get rid of their hunting grounds, and it's no loss for the Six Nations or the Cherokee. So what's going to happen is the Shawnee are outraged when they hear about these treaties being made, and they have no involvement with them. And to make matters worse, now you're going to have all these colonists coming in on the hunting grounds of the Shawnee. This is going to set the stage for the conflict we're talking about tonight. Very confusing. Here's a map, maybe to make life a little bit easier for you. You're going to see up there Pittsboro. Yes, I know what I'm saying. Pittsboro. That's how it's supposed to be pronounced, but us Yinzers butchered it. You're going to see Pittsburgh up there. It was established initially as a French outpost known as Fort Duquesne during the French-Indian War. The British eventually captured it in 1758. And up till 1772, the British garrisoned it. But after 1772, they pulled their limited resources because there were certain other situations developing on the East Coast. I may not have nothing to do with some sort of snowball fight up in Boston, something like that. Anyways, and the British Crown have really entrusted the protection of the frontier to the colonies. So you had Fort Pitt garrisoned by local militia. And then you can see the Ohio River itself. And you'll see in the red, that is the new boundary between colonial America and indigenous America as established by these treaties we talked about, most notably the Treaty of Fort Stanwick. The problem is particularly when you get around the Ohio River where Point Pleasant is, this is not the home of your main Six Nations. This is the home of the Mingo people, of some surviving vestiges of the Delaware and of the Shawnee. And as I mentioned, the Delaware and Mingo, they've kind of been subjugated by the Six Nations. They've been kind of conquered by them in earlier conflicts. And though they're represented by the Six Nations, it's not by choice. The Shawnee have tried to distance themselves so far from the Six Nations. They're so deep now in the Ohio River Valley, and yet the colonists are always seem to find a way to take their land. And the Cherokee, they'd be going more down to the south, going down into very southern Virginia, Kentucky, and down to modern North Carolina. So that's kind of set up the stage. And that dark green, this is the land that's legal to settle now. This is now legal to settle. And boy, your armed real estate agencies like the Ohio Company are going to take advantage of this. Around this time, as all these treaties are going around, Virginia got a new governor. His name is John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore. He's a Scottish noble who really did not want to be in Virginia. He had actually taken the governorship of New York in the early 1770s and was very content with being in New York high society. Not so content with being transferred when Virginia's governor died unexpectedly and we needed a replacement in a hurry. So the British Crown told Murray, hey, you're the most responsible gentleman we got out here. Get your butt down to Virginia or else we're going to have a big issue. He was very frustrated by this, but he's going to make the best of the situation. And when he arrives in Virginia by the mid-1770s, it's a very troublesome time to be governor. There was a lot of seditious rhetoric occurring, not just in the backcountry, but in the legislature itself of Virginia, the House of Burgess. A lot of your representatives, they are not too enthused by all of the intolerable acts that are being imposed upon the New England colonies, and they're also suffered from it as well. So Lord Dunmore, who we're going to refer to him for the rest of the video, I mean, the war's named after him. Lord Dunmore's trying to placate these seditious attitudes amongst the colony of Virginia. He's trying to find a way to unify the people, get their eye off of the rebellious actions occurring by the Sons of Liberty up in New England and try to kind of rally around something else. And he does want to also generally protect the people of Virginia because he is sensing there is a great threat to its border. Shawnee are very not enthusiastic about Virginians moving into the Ohio River Valley in the region of Kentucky. It's going to sound weird, but this is around the time that this is all claimed by Virginia. Kentucky's part of Virginia. We'll talk more about the borders later on. One of your early groups trying to get into Kentucky would be Daniel Boone. We recognize that name, Daniel Boone. Boone is trying to get people to go down into Kentucky and settle it. It's this new land to develop. He's one of the forerunners for it. He is one of the big investors in it. And in October of 1773, Boone is going to cooperate with a William Russell, and they're going to try to escort groups of settlers and surveyors into Kentucky. Now, Kentucky is this Shawnee hunting ground that has just been given over to the British by the Six Nations and the Cherokee. So they're not too enthused. They're very not non-enthusiastic. And the Boone Russell party walk right into this unhappiness. A war party, which some say was Cherokee initially, but later sources say it was more likely Shawnee, which would make sense to consider the situation, are going to ambush the Boone Russell party. Actually leads to the death of many of the party, including Boone's 17-year-old son, as well as Russell's son. When this happens, everybody along the Ohio River, all the way back up to Pittsburgh, is scared because this sounds like a resurgence of Indian wars. Raids happening up and down the frontier as it did in the French and Indian War, as it did during Pontiac's Rebellion. Here we go all over again. So throughout the fall of 1773 through the spring of 1774, there are rumors going all down the Ohio River talking about, hey, did you hear about this house that got raided? Did you hear about this boat convoy? They got ambushed. They got shot out from the banks of the river. It's a lot more rumors than anything actually happening, at least in my interpretation of events from what I've been reading. Everybody says stuff's happening, but nobody actually is like a proper witness that saw it, at least not throughout these early months. But this definitely puts the frontier on edge. Militias start organizing, start advising people to take shelter. Construction of forts are starting to begin throughout the limited time they have in 1773 before winter sets in. It's also alarming Lord Dunmore, and Dunmore anticipates there's probably going to be some type of border war with the Shawnee. So Dunmore is going to call in the services of a John Connolly. Now, John Connolly is actually from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He's not from Virginia, but he gets called upon by Dunmore. Dunmore had heard about Connolly's qualifications and asked him, hey, do you want the job of, being a deputy for Virginia, for the West Augusta district of Virginia? Connolly listens to it and he agrees. It sounds like a good business venture, a good opportunity to make cash. So he's going to take a commission from Governor Dunmore, and Connolly's going to ride up in the early winter of 1774. He's going to ride up to Fort Pitt. Now, the problem is, you see, nobody really knows who owns Fort Pitt at this point. And this brings us into another question. Who owns Pittsburgh? So first we were ranting about who owns Kentucky, and that's kind of starting a war between the Shawnee people and Virginia. Now we got a whole question of who owns Pittsburgh. So this is going to be very convoluted with a lot of ramblings involving surveying skills. And I know one of our Garrison members is very into the history of surveying in the 18th and 19th century. So he's probably going to cringe in intense pain as I ruin this reciting of history, of surveying history. Virginia, when it was established in the 17th century, its western border was the Pacific Ocean. You heard me right. It was the Pacific Ocean. You have to remember, Virginia is one of the first colonies chartered by the British Empire in North America. So their boundaries were very vague. And Virginia, a century later, has become the most affluent of those 13 British colonies. Pennsylvania came along much later. Pennsylvania isn't set up until the late 17th century. And it had initially, the Penn Charter really was weighing on the Maryland Charter. It's like, well, wherever the Maryland's western boundary is, that's where ours will be too. Eventually had to be amended to be, give us an actual bearing, and it would be 5 degrees of longitude from the Delaware River, which would mean you would end up with essentially, imagine Pennsylvania's western border if it had parallel squiggles to the Delaware River. That had been one of the most convoluted arbitrary lines ever conceived as an official border. And there's several maps actually showing that as the border in the 18th century. But that really wasn't the answer. And especially when the French and Indian War ensued, you're going to have this problem of you have military conquest, treaty making, and private land claims being made over Pittsburgh by both the colony of Virginia and the colony of Pennsylvania. Virginia sees Pennsylvania as part of its westward expansion to the Pacific Ocean because it goes past that 5 degrees of longitude from the Delaware River requirement in the PA western border. Where Pennsylvania is arguing, hey, no. We made treaties with the people of Western Pennsylvania, the Delaware people. We have bought this land from them. This is all in legal binding in the colony of Pennsylvania. We did this for Pennsylvania, not for Virginia. So it is therefore Pennsylvania land. These natives gave this land to Pennsylvania, not Virginia. Also, there's the fact that in 1758, General John Forbes' British Army built a road network from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to capture the free rivers from the French and allow the British to construct Fort Pitt. So it's a Pennsylvania road that tethers the forks of the Ohio River back to civilization. So for these reasons, you have so many conflicts over who owns Pittsburgh in 1774. Enough so that Pittsburgh actually sits in 2 counties and 2 different colonies at this point. Depending on where your allegiances lie, Pittsburgh sits in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, which was created the year prior, or it sits in Augusta County, Virginia. Or you could be a real diehard. Let me get you this one. You be a real diehard and claim you're not even in either of the colonies. You're in the new 14th colony of Vandalia. Oh, it's convoluted. You're probably wondering, what does this have to do with Lord Dunmore's War? We're only talking about Shawnees and Virginia fighting out. What is this? What does Pittsburgh have to do with all of this? Well, Lord Dunmore feels the frontier is under threat and he needs to start raising militias and constructing fortifications. And the largest of the fortifications in the Ohio River Valley is at the confluence. That's Fort Pitt. And in 1772, remember how I said the British government gave up Fort Pitt to the local militias? Well, there were both Pennsylvania and Virginia militias trying to occupy Fort Pitt simultaneously. It went as well as you imagined. So Connolly is sent up by Dunmore to be an agent of Virginia to resolve all of this controversy over who owns Fort Pitt and claim this is Virginia. We are part of Augusta County. Virginia's frontier is under threat of attack. It is therefore required all able-bodied males from the ages of, I think, 16 to like 45 have to muster into the militia and get Fort Dunmore ready for war. That's right. They reclare Fort Pitt. They recall it Dunmore. Dunmore names it after himself. It's beautiful. It's ridiculous. How do you think the local inhabitants responded? Very mixed. Your Pennsylvania elected officials, such as Arthur Sinclair, he has like 15 million different jobs in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania at this point. He's none too enthused that, wait, why are Pennsylvanians being conscripted into another colony's militia? You can't do that. You can't do that. And St. Clair and the other Pennsylvania officials try to go to Fort Dunmore and try to explain, no. Okay, let's stop this charade. We're not at war with the Shawnee. That's your beef. We're up here, mind our own business. We have good relations with not just the Shawnee, but we have good relations with the Mingo and the Delaware. They're right over there. Look, they're over there at George Croghan's hall trading with him right now. Please don't disrupt the peace. Please don't. And Connolly's going, well, according to my calculations, actually, you're in Virginia. Look at your charter. Look how you read it. Look how we interpreted it. You're in Virginia. So maybe you should consider start joining our militia right now before we arrest you. To which St. Clair's like, no, I'm going to arrest you first because you're illegally forcing Pennsylvanians into Virginia service. I should say for the actual individual Pennsylvanian, your lowly Pennsylvanian living around Pittsburgh this time, most of them actually saw themselves as Virginian, so they really didn't have a problem joining the militia. It was more your higher brass elected officials riding the motorcycles. Yeah. That's what they got. If you became an elected official in Penn's colony, you got a motorcycle. Yeah, it's great like that. Your higher brass were more your pro-Pennsylvanians in the Pittsburgh debate. Your lower class, they were pro-Virginian because Virginia was the most affluent colony, and you want to be part of the winners, not the losers. So Connolly was arrested by Pennsylvania authorities, and now they do let him go after a few days being held in prison at Westmore County seat of Hannistown, and he's kind of left to roam on his own devices because they're like, okay, your court date's not till April, so you're on parole. Be back here in April. And Connolly's like, really? Yeah. So Connolly goes back to Virginia, tells Dunmore, hey, I'm under arrest. The Pennsylvania officials there are not agreeing with our assessment of the border. To which Dunmore says, here's 200 militiamen. They're now going to agree to my assessment. So in the spring of 1774, Connolly shows back up in time for his court hearing, but he's not there to take part in a hearing. He shows up to Hannistown, surrounds this Pennsylvania courthouse with Virginia militiamen, and basically lays down the law and explains, you are in Augusta County, Virginia. This is now Virginia. You're now under Virginia terms. No ifs, ands, or buts. And again, most of the folks that would have been thrown into the militia, they're sympathetic to Virginia in this debate. So all that was happening, and we haven't even gotten to the main fighting yet. And once more, I'll ask a question a half hour in. What on earth was Dunmores War? So let's get back to our plot. So it's the spring of 1774, and Virginia has basically taken over southwestern Pennsylvania by force. We've christened Fort Pitt Fort Dunmore, and are now starting to recruit all the local inhabitants into militia. Most of them are doing it willingly, though you didn't like sign up for the militia. You had no choice in Virginia. You were part of the militia. That's part of being a citizen. You had to respond to be a militia call. They're getting Fort Dunmore ready for a conflict with the Shawnee. Speaking of which, what's happening? Because Fort Dunmore is all the way up. Oh, let me show you. Here's the beautiful image of Fort Pitt. I mean, Dunmore. That'd be where the Golden Triangle we call it today, with the big fountain. If you look in the background, you may even be able to see Heinz Field. Well, it takes about 250 years, but you get there in the end. So what's going on is, trying to think where we're at in the story. Okay, we're in April of 1774. Back down deep in the Ohio River Valley. Now, the Shawnee there's rumors of the Shawnee, as well as some Cherokee and some other folks. They are attacking surveyors that are coming into Kentucky, coming into this land because it's now legal to settle in the eyes of Virginia. So at one point, some of these parties, they start getting intelligence from Fort Dunmore. Connolly starts sending messages to all these surveyors that are down the Ohio River Valley that are under threat and said, hey, be careful. We're having a bad situation with the Shawnee, prepare for the worst type deal. It may be best if you want to start building some fortifications. We really do not advise you going across the Ohio River right now. We advise you going deeper into the Ohio River. And a lot of surveyors are going, but we already invested all these resources in these expeditions this spring. We want to go do something. Okay, they don't whine like that. Many of them actually agree with Connolly's assessments that, yeah, it seems war may be imminent and we should start preparing for the worst. They get a little excessive for their preparations, and one particular party will get grotesque, as you're about to see. So there is some exchange of shots between Shawnee war parties and these Virginia surveyors trying to move down the Ohio River. And most of these surveying parties decide, you know what, this ain't worth it. We're going back up to Fort Dunmore, or we're going to build a fort wherever we're standing. But a particular party decides to take matters into their own hands. And what they do will shock the entire Ohio River Valley. So on April 30th of 1774, a group of Mingo people were invited across the Ohio River to the Baker Station. Now, this was a house/trading post that was ran by Mr. and Mrs. Baker. Had been there for some years. And this particular contingent of Mingo were very friendly with the Bakers. Frequently would go across, trade with them, have a whole weekend to hang out and stuff. They were friends. They were neighbors. They knew each other well. On one particular occasion, when this group of Mingo, and the Mingo, this really isn't just like a war party. This is a family. This is women, children, men. They're all there. They come across like routine, decide to come, enjoy some drinks with the bakers. And there's some extra folks at the trading post, notably the Great House brothers. And all of a sudden, deep into their rejoicing, all of a sudden, the Great House brothers and their associates start pulling out hatchets and knives and begin to brutally stab and murder this Mingo family. I don't know truthfully how much involvement the bakers themselves had. I've wondered if they were kind of forced into this situation because they seem to have had a good relations with the Mingos. I don't see why they would want to change all of a sudden. Eventually, some of the Mingo get word that something's amiss, try to go up, they get fired at, they're thrown back, and then the Great Houses decide to evacuate the scene. It's estimated anywhere from like 9 to 13 people were killed in what became known as the Yellow Creek Massacre. And amongst those killed was both the brother and the sister of Logan. Logan is a very affluent Mingo warrior. A lot of people claim he was a chief because of the elegance in his speeches, but to my knowledge, he never actually was a chief. Now, his father was. His father was a chief with the Cayuga people, which is one of the Iroquois Six Nations. However, Logan himself did not want to be directly associated with that confederacy and kind of broke off and became one of these Mingo people. Like I said, the Mingo, they share a lot of Iroquois culture. They share the same some of the language, but they want to be their own separate people. They want to have their own self-determination. Logan was, by and large, a very peaceful figure in diplomacy in the Ohio River Valley. He was not very often involved in warfare, more so calling for peace terms. So for this to happen to his family was horrifying for him. And it horrified people on both sides of the Ohio River. I'm not really getting into detail the grotesque acts that Great House's party conducted on Logan's family. It was awful. If the story is to believe to be true, it is one of the most grotesque murder scenes you'll ever hear about. Worse than anything the ID channel ever tried to promote. It is awful. And Logan is furious and wants revenge. So now we have gone from this border war between the Shawnee and Virginia. It has gotten very personal now, as many of the Mingo, including Logan, are forming a confederacy with the Shawnee. And this means you're going to have a mourning war. And that's a term referring to these conflicts that would occur between various tribes that, in the event of a mass fatality rate that being imposed on one tribe, they would go out and inflict the punishment on the other side. Revenge. It's a fancy term for revenge. And boy, does the Ohio River Valley light up like a Roman candle with raids after the Yellow Creek Massacre. Virginia is now definitely involved in a major war, a brutal war, the likes of which has not been seen in over a decade in the Ohio River Valley. However, back in Williamsburg, Virginia, Lord Dunmore has finally called together the House of Burgesses. Dunmore was very hesitant with actually bringing the House of Burgess together. When he finally calls them together in the spring of 1774, Dunmore wants to talk, how are we going to fund this large militia army? It's the only way to protect our frontier. Most of the Burgess, they don't want to talk about that. They don't really have much interest. They just say, I'll just activate the militia temporarily, just go protocol like the laws. It'll, use them for 30 days or stuff like that. They're more interested in talking with how are they going to respond to new actions happening up in Boston as the situation is greatly deteriorating. And there's these rumors of a Continental Congress wanting to be formed from all 13 colonies to meet in Philadelphia. And well, eventually Dunmore, after hearing basically the House of Burgess I should say they're directly ignoring Lord Dunmore's war, but they're kind of like, yeah, but we fought Indian wars before. This is different. This dispute between us and Parliament, this is a new thing. Dunmore basically gets to a point, screw you guys, I'm going to the Ohio by myself. Dunmore is going to dissolve the House of Burgess. Now, this is something that is actually was in the power of the Virginia governor at this point. When you dissolve it, what you're doing is you're not outright, closing it up. What you're doing is you're saying, okay, we can't reach an agreement, so I'm going to break the gridlock. We're having new elections. That's what dissolution means. Have a nice, break. We'll see. We'll see you in the next elections. That's what the dissolution meant. But as Dunmore leaves to go and personally lead this militia army that's growing, got a text message. What's going on here? So how many political text messages do you get in a day? Let me know in the comment section below. How many political text messages do you get in a day? Let's see how many did I get. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 in one day. How many political ads are you having to sit through as you watch this replay? Let me know in the comment section, because I do not control that. Mystery Man just tuned in. Hey, thank you for joining in, Mystery Man. How are you doing tonight? Oh, where were we? Oh, Lord Dunmore. Screw you guys. I'm going to the Ohio. So Lord Dunmore dissolves the House of Burgess because they cannot come to an agreement over how they're going to fund this growing militia force. He decides we'll solve that after the matter. So Dunmore is going to go up and he is going to take charge of one of 2 wings of an army. And Dunmore's strategy, if I can, what's that? Dunmore's immediate strategy, if I can get the slideshow back up, he's going to use the limited militia that's already been manifested on the Ohio River Valley, that's been starting to organize since Logan is leading Mingo and Shawnee raids into Virginia at this point. He is going to organize kind of a counter raid, kind of like a Doolittle raid, as it were, during World War II, really to show the Shawnee and Mingo that you can't poke us around. We will bite back. He's going to send a very small force led by, I think it's a McDonald, to raid the village of Wadaminka. I want to say that's a Mingo village. I think it's a Shawnee or Mingo village, one of the two. So they're starting to raid villages that are associated with the Shawnee and Mingo people as a response. Although these Virginian retaliatory strikes are very minor, they destroy crops. There are a few people made casualties. It doesn't stop the much fiercer indigenous raids happening on the Virginia frontier. But this is really in preparation for a larger expedition against the Shawnee and the Mingo. This is going to require Lord Dunmore to raise about 2,000 militiamen, and he's going to make a 2-prong strike. If I can get this to the next one. You're going to have the northern wing, which Lord Dunmore is going to leave Williamsburg right up to Winchester to personally take charge of. This will include militiamen from Berkeley and Frederick counties, as well as the West Augusta district, which that's Western Pennsylvania. That'll be Lord Dunmore's contingent. He's going to meet up with Connolly, and he'll kind of be his subordinate. The southern wing is going to be under the charge of Andrew Lewis, and it's going to include the Boatwort, Augusta, and Fincastle County militias. There's also a few smaller militias mixed in there as well. They're going to depart Camp Union, and they're going to head toward Point Pleasant. That is where the Kanawha River empties into the Ohio River. Remember, that was early on going to be the boundary between colonial America and indigenous America. Told you Point Pleasant's very important in our story. Both wings are going to meet up at Fort Gower, which is approximately, I want to say, it's not Wheeling, it's far south than Wheeling. What is it today? I actually don't know where Fort Gower is. Oh, you're going to learn with me today. All right, Fort Gower, where are you situated? Hockingport, Ohio, but we're across the river, if that makes sense. We're in West Virginia, across from Hockingport, Ohio. That's where they're going to rendezvous. And then this militia army is going to come together, and they're going to march on Chillicothe, which is the leading Shawnee village immediately north of the Ohio River. So that is the focus of Dunmore's army. He is going to get these 2 wings of militia organized. They're going to rendezvous along the Ohio River, then push in one major drive toward Chillicothe, which is kind of like a Shawnee capital along the Ohio River Valley. That's his goal, to end this mess that's developing in the Ohio River Valley. This is the same Point Pleasant where Mothman was sighted, and we actually get to talk about Mothman when this stream's over. There's a valid reason why I have to bring up Mothman before the stream is over. So that's the plan. Now, normally I'm very critical of militias. I think a lot of Americans today have a misconception of militias and how they operate in the 18th century. Most militias were not the best, especially I'll say Pennsylvania's militia was trash. I'm sorry. It was not great during the mid 18th century, but that's because it really didn't have a standing army until the 1756. So it was still learning the ropes. Virginia, however, I got to give credit to them. They're probably the best colonial militia prior to the American Revolution. The militia has been ingrained in Virginia culture for well over a century and a half at this point. And this particular army that Dunmore has organized to go against the Mingo and the Shawnee is a who's who. We talked about Andrew Lewis. He's going to be one of the wing commanders. Andrew Lewis, he was one of the hardest working officers in the Virginia Regiment during the French Indian War, served under George Washington, later on served in the House of Burgess for a while. And eventually he'll be part of, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's part of the Privy Council of Thomas Jefferson during his governorship during the American Revolution. So Lewis, a very important figure in Virginia history. That's a image of his statue. There's no portrait of him. That's the closest thing I could get. You're also going to have Adam Stephen, who was the senior commander of the Virginia Regiment at the end of the French and Indian War. He's a bit of a political rival, George Washington's, but I kind of call him half a dozen war Stephen, because if you go by his record, Stephen served in King George's War in the 1740s, served in the French and Indian War. If you count the Anglo-Cherokee War, it's own separate thing in the 1760s. He raised Virginia militia for Pontiac's War. He's now here in Lord Dunmore's War. Oh, no, it's only 4. No, wait. King, French and Indian War, Anglo-Cherokee. Yep, that's 5 if we do Lord Dunmore's War. And then 6 because he'll be a general during the American Revolution. I actually got a whole biography on Adam Stephen on the channel here. You have William Crawford, who's been living in modern day southwestern Pennsylvania. So he's he has a lot of relations with native tribes, including the Mingo and the Delaware. Actually, the story goes that there was one survivor of the Yellow Creek Massacre, and that child was actually given to William Crawford when another Virginian militia party found the scene, took it to William Crawford, and William Crawford eventually turned it over to its father, which was actually John Gibson, a Pennsylvania trader who had actually was married to, I forget her name, was married to Logan's sister. So there's another connection to the Yellow Creek Massacre, showing you how personal it was and how deplorable it was. It impacted both indigenous and colonial America. So there's a story there. But William Crawford's involved. Daniel Morgan, of course, he's going to be involved. George Rogers Clark will be involved. Michael Cresap, who's not as a well-known name, but he is very important to the frontier history of Virginia, Maryland, and southwestern Pennsylvania. You're going to have William Ingalls, who William Ingalls isn't so much the frontiersman as actually his wife was. Mary Ingalls has a harrowing story of survival. She was captured during the French and Indian War by a tribe and then walked several hundred miles back home in the wilderness. So there's that relation there. William Russell, close associate of Daniel Boone, who we talked about earlier, and Evan Shelby, as well as his son Isaac Shelby. And Isaac Shelby won the commanders at the Battle of Kings Mountain in 1780 on the Patriot Militia. What I'm trying to tell you is Dunmore's army is probably the best case scenario for forming a militia and taking it out on the battlefield. This is not your standard militia. And the lessons that are about to be learned by these gentlemen in Dunmore's army during this brief conflict are going to bleed into the American Revolution. So with that out of the way, the actual armies don't get moving until September of 1774. Dunmore is going to go up to the North Wing. He's going to go up to Fort Dunmore, get the whole army together there. Remember, that's Pittsburgh. And then he's going to make his way down the Ohio River. I should also mention that as the situation's deteriorating throughout the summer of 1774, you have this situation building where Fort Dunmore, there are tribal leaders going up the Ohio River and going to Fort Dunmore and basically communicating what's happening behind the scenes, essentially amongst the Mingo and Shawnee, and essentially goes, you know, it's mostly by the end of 1774, it's mostly Delaware that are abstaining from the conflict in mass, but individuals are joining. So we have this interesting situation where they're kind of saying, hey, this is what's going on, this is the strength of the Shawnee, this is the strength of the Mingo, this is the strength of us. But every week it kind of gets to a point of there's less of us at the village because they've gone off the fight. You usually have your elder saying, we're not going off the fight, and we don't agree what they're doing, but we can't stop them. The Yellow Creek Massacre really turned this into a far dangerous situation than initially was. It went from a border dispute that may have been able to be solved with an air treaty, most likely not. And then it blew into a personal mission that there's no way this war is going to resolve it, no matter the outcome. So yeah, you have Delaware involved in this conflict. Most of their leaders are kind of trying to be the commissioners, I guess you were, your peace delegation between Virginia and the Shawnee and Mingo. So you have that interesting relationship happening. So Dunmore, he's going to basically tell any native leader that's still around Fort Dunmore, go tell the tribes in the Ohio River Valley I'm coming, and it's probably the best idea to come find me and sue for peace. Meanwhile, Lewis is making his way up the Kanawha River Valley, and he's going to get to Point Pleasant in early October of 1774. Now, the Shawnee Mingo Confederacy are aware of how massive an army is moving on them, and it's decided to try to defeat them in detail. This is kind of very similar to what Napoleon Bonaparte's going to do in 1815, or try to do in 1815, during the 100 Days War, where he's going to try to pick off each of the coalition's army one by one so his numbers are not overwhelmed. That's basically what's happening here. It's decided amongst the Shawnee Mingo Confederacy, amongst war chiefs and leaders such as Chief Cornstalk, as well as Logan, and there's many others involved. Those are just the two key names. That they're going to go try to attack Lewis first. They're going to go and attack Lewis's column first, because they're in a pretty bad location of Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant's called because it's a confluence. You have the Kanawha River emptying into the Ohio. You have this very narrow plateau on the east side of the Ohio River, overlooked by these very steep bluffs. So it's a choke point. It's not a place you want to be. If you have enemy forces outflank you and get on those hilltops, you could be driven right into the Ohio River. So it's a dangerous place to stay long term. Lewis really is hanging around there for a few days, kind of waiting on to hear from Lord Dunmore how Dunmore's doing on his march. So Lewis is hanging out there, and the leaders of this Mingo Shawnee Confederacy decide to strike Lewis first because of the location he is in. And that battle will occur 250 years ago today. There's a reason we're doing the stream today, because this, on October 10th, 1774, 250 years ago, is the Battle of Point Pleasant, when Chief Cornstalk and the Mingo Shawnee Confederacy are going to cross the Ohio River and surprise the southern wing of the Virginia militia. The battle is brutal. It goes on all day long, from the first dawn of light to the final glimpse of dusk. The Shawnee and Mingo Confederacy, what they try to do, they try to come in from the rear of Lewis's camp. You can see the arrows coming across the river on the map there. Lewis is caught off guard, which is pretty surprising. He probably should have known he was in a poor location, but he felt that nobody was nearby. He felt that he was in a good location, that they weren't going to meet any resistance until they crossed the Ohio River, I presume. And there's a group of militiamen that go out early in the morning. They go north of the camp to go kind of hunt for wild game because, well, the supplies aren't so great for the Virginia militia. They got the numbers, but they really don't got the supply network, particularly with food. That's in part because, House of Burgess couldn't agree on how to fund this mission. They were dissolved by Dunmore himself. So yeah, they're kind of screwed at the moment supply wise. So instead of having this poor, like oily livestock slaughtered, some of these guys decide we're going to sneak off. We're going to go hunt some squirrels. So they go north and they claim to discover an opening in the forest that is covered for like 5 acres with warriors. That's their claim. I don't know how that represents numerically. It was probably a couple hundred. I've heard 800's the number thrown out that the Mingo and Shawnee had with them during the Battle of Point Pleasant. Lewis probably had around 1,000 militiamen, but these are both very ideal estimations. Obviously, these 4 or 5 militiamen are not going to be able to hold off against the whole of the Mingo-Shawnee Confederacy, so they're going to run back into camp and raise the alarm. And Lewis makes probably a very bad decision. Instead of forming a defense around the camp, because again, it could be used as a choke point. You have that very narrow gap between the Ohio River and Crooked Creek. He's going to decide instead to organize 2 parties, 150 men each. They're going to be commanded by 2 of Lewis's chief subordinates. One's going to be a Fleming, and the other is actually going to be Lewis's own brother, Charles Lewis. They're going to go in a line in columns, march out until they meet the enemy. They get ambushed. Lewis is going to be mortally wounded. Charles Lewis, Andrew's brother, will be mortally wounded. Fleming is going to be very badly wounded as well. And they're going to start falling back to camp. So not a good idea. By this point, we're very close to the main Virginia encampment in the confluence. But this is where the battle starts turning in Virginia's favor because Lewis does what he should have done earlier and has formed a defensive perimeter that's very close, very tight-knit, anchoring the left flank on the Ohio River, the right flank on Crooked Creek. And throughout the midday, you have both. Incredibly, you have the natives in a battle line, essentially. I mean, they're not literally shoulder to shoulder, but they're essentially bottlenecked into a battle line, firing away at a Virginia battle line. So very, very interesting tactics for this wilderness fighting, what you're seeing here. And this goes on for several hours. The 2 battle lines slugging it out. Smoke is completely wafting in the air. You can't really see who's in front of you. There's going to be some efforts made to try to break through the Virginia battle line, some attacks by the natives. There's efforts made to try to go into Crooked Creek itself by some war parties to try to outflank, but they're unsuccessful. And very slowly, Lewis is able to rally the Virginia battle line together, and they slowly start walking north out of the confluence, starting to push the Mingo-Shawnee Confederacy back. Eventually, some of the militiamen are going to get across Crooked Creek, get behind the flank of the Confederacy, and starts pouring enfilade and fire down upon them from the high ground. And as dusk settles over the battlefield, Cornstalk and the other survivors are going to pull themselves across the Ohio River, ending the Battle of Point Pleasant. It's a very brief description of the tactical overview of the battle. If you want to hear a more in-depth explanation of the battle, you're in luck, because here on Redot Productions, I have a whole animated battle map devoted to the Battle of Point Pleasant. Many, many moons ago, one of my earlier series I made stop motion animated battle maps. I'm going to be straightforward. They're not great stop motion. I mean, we're talking like 1 frame every 4 seconds. It's not great stuff, but it's stuff I did during the unspecified event we cannot mention by name on the TubeU, or else I'll be deplatformed. The thing that happened 4 years ago. Yes, that thing. So that's what I was doing when I was stuck in here in this room. So yeah, if you have a chance, I would recommend checking out. There's definitely inaccuracies in it. There's pronunciation that I'm not happy with. Like I say, I mispronounce Kanawha. I keep saying Kenawa. It's awful. It's deplorable. But if you want to get more in detail about how the troop movements occurred throughout October 10th, 1774, I do recommend it. But the Battle of Point Pleasant is a brutal wilderness engagement, one of the fiercest in American frontier history. When the dust settles, there's approximately 80 Virginia militiamen that are dead, another 100 are wounded. It's anticipated about 40 of the warriors that participated, they're killed, and we don't know how many of them were wounded. So both kind of suffer, I wouldn't say equal, pretty decent casualties, pretty equal to each other. Ultimately, Lewis gets a victory here at Point Pleasant, though he suffers the higher casualties. He does hold his ground and drives the Confederacy back across the river, and that kind of gives a bit of a moral boost to his wing of the Southern Army, southern wing of Dunmore's army. Eventually, Dunmore and Lewis, their two columns are going to rendezvous, and they're going to cross the Ohio River after the battle, just a few days after the Battle of Point Pleasant. And it really hits the psyche of the Shawnee of the Battle of Point Pleasant. This is going to be the only major battle of Lord Dunmore's War. This is it. Because just a few days later, in mid-October of 1774, Dunmore with the Unified Virginia Army is going to make a fortified camp known as Camp Charlotte, basically kind of egging the Confederacy to attack him in a well-defended position. The Shawnee decide they've had enough, and it's between the choices of we have to leave our villages. Very likely, many of us are going to die in the ensuing flight. Or we go talk with Dunmore, who's opening an olive branch right now. So the Shawnee, as well as Mingo representatives, they're going to descend on Camp Charlotte to talk with Dunmore, and here's terms. In the eyes of the Shawnee, they are very good terms. Really, what Dunmore wants is just recognition of the Ohio River being the boundary between colonial America and indigenous America. He does request that all captives be returned, which is very common with any of these treaties you hear about between the French and Indian War and the American Revolution. But there's no real heavy retributions put on the Shawnees for their involvement in this war. Everybody kind of wants it to be over. Dunmore really tells them just recognize the Ohio River is the boundary. Let Virginia take Kentucky. It's no longer your hunting grounds. It's ours. The treaties have decided that, and we're all good here. The Shawnee shakingly agreed to Dunmore's terms at Camp Charlotte. The Mingos, not so much. The Mingo leaders, they question a lot of the terms. Like, wait a minute, we went through all this and this is it? We're going out after one battle? You have to remember where the heart of the Shawnee was in this war and the heart of the Mingo. The Shawnee they got into this conflict because of miscommunication by underrepresentation from other tribes. At the very least in this situation, somebody's come forward and recognized the Shawnee as their own individual group and is negotiating with them right now here at the Treaty of Camp Charlotte. So they're getting what they wanted, just a say in the outcome of the Ohio River Valley. The Mingo, they want blood. They want blood because of the atrocities that were committed by Virginia militiamen at Yellow Creek. And of course, there's probably many more atrocities you can list before Lord Dunmore's War. So one battle is not enough to stop this morning war for the Mingo, for Logan. Actually, Logan will respond to the Treaty of Camp Charlotte with essentially sending, I don't even think he goes at the final treaty signing. He sends, I want to say it was John Gibson, actually. He's going to send John Gibson. If not, it's definitely maybe a Delaware middleman. He's going to come up to Dunmore and hand him what's known as Logan's Lament, which is this very eloquent, mythologized speech that Logan reportedly gives to his people about how for years he had offered, he had always offered food, he'd always offered supplies, he'd always offered his support to any white man that ever requested it from him. Why was his family killed? What did he do wrong? He could never, ever be friends with the white man again after what had happened at Yellow Creek. Why? What was the purpose of that massacre? What was there to gain? What did he do? If you want to read Logan's Lament, it's available. At least variations of it are available on the interwebs to read. I don't want to ruin it by reading it with my awful Yinzer accent. We're not going to do that. So the Shawnee shakingly agreed to the Treaty of Camp Charlotte. The Mingo refused. And in the final act of Lord Dunmore's War, I think it's William Crawford's company, they're going to go forward and they're going to actually burn a Mingo village deeper into the Ohio country. And that's it. That's the tactical end of Lord Dunmore's War. It's kind of like a War of 1812 situation. Everything sort of goes back to status quo, at least on paper. Because boy, when everybody gets back home to Williamsburg and gets back to the eastern side of Virginia, boy, a lot has happened since they've been gone. What has happened since the end of Lord Dunmore's War? Well, Lord Dunmore is going to discover that essentially he's lost complete control of the colony of Virginia, because just because he dissolved the House of Burgess, it not meant they stopped meeting. And the members of the House of Burgess, after they were disillusioned, they're going to go meet in a tavern in the First Virginia Convention. And they're going to eventually get involved with the larger Continental Congress that's meeting up in Philadelphia. The Virginia Convention will send representatives up that way, and that'll lead to the Olive Branch petition being sent overseas. All that wonderful stuff, all that crazy stuff like that. So next, Lord Dunmore's not having fun. Yeah, he gets back and learns, oh my God, my colony's basically in rebellion. What is happening? Several militia officers at some point during this whole conflict get word of everything that's deteriorating up in Boston, all the intolerable acts, what's happening up there. And essentially they decide, before the militia disperse at the end of 1774, they're going to get together at Fort Gower. And we get the Fort Gower Resolves, which in essence is all these Virginia militia officers resolving to defend the just rights and privileges of American colonists. May sound a little familiar to a certain declaration coming 2 years later. The American Revolution will officially touch off April 19th, 1775, just about a half a year after the Battle of Point Pleasant. Cornstalk is going to try and keep out of the war after the brutal Battle of Point Pleasant. He becomes a bit of more of a peace delegate. He tries to warn the Shawnee against going to war with the colonies again. They don't really listen to him. You're going to have individual Shawnees. They're going to renew actually, Lord Dunmore's War, though it ends in 1774, didn't stop Shawnee raids on the frontier. They're going to start attacking Kentucky, which is now even more inhabited in just a year's time. More people have crammed their way into this new free land of Kentucky, Virginia colonists. Cornstalk tries to talk the Shawnee down from making those attacks. At one point, he's actually to go to Point Pleasant, which is now guarded by a Virginia militia fort, Fort Randolph. Unfortunately, because there was a raid made near Fort Randolph, a militiaman guarding Fort Randolph decided to go into Cornstalk's quarters and assassinate him. So he dies, oddly enough, at Point Pleasant, but in 1777. And he is actually buried on the site of the Battle of Point Pleasant. If you go, they have like a little state park in downtown Point Pleasant today. Reportedly, that you can actually pay your respects at Cornstalk's grave. Logan would continue his morning war against the colonies. This would just bleed into the American Revolution, and he would keep this up until his death in 1780. And that is the story of Lord Dunmore's War. Now, we're going to wrap up by saying that there's some people that claim the Battle of Point Pleasant is actually the first battle of the Revolution. The Lexington Concord does not deserve that distinction. There, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, there was a conspiracy theory by historians. The theory went that this whole war was essentially an inside job by Lord Dunmore to try to wear out Virginia's military resources so they would not be able to efficiently rebel against British sovereignty. So they see the Battle of Point Pleasant as being the first true battle of the American Revolution, because immediately after, all the Virginia officers, in a sense, declare that they are independent free people with the right to defend themselves with arms, with the Fort Gower Resolves. And at the Battle of Point Pleasant demonstrated and genuinely did demonstrate their battlefield prowess and why they should be independent. So that's been the theory. That was the theory. I don't buy into it. I don't think Dunmore, I do believe Dunmore saw this conflict as a really good distraction to unify Virginia and try to prevent a rebellion, to prevent Virginia from joining the New England colonies rebellion. I do agree to that much. I don't think he's definitely not controlling this whole war. I just don't, he ain't out to go and telling the Shawnee to do this and the Mingo to do that. That was a whole independent thing. And keep in mind, the whole crux of this conflict really was that you had these groups of people in the Ohio River Valley that were not properly represented. They did not have their voices heard in the deciding of how this land would be cut up, how it is today. So, yeah, I don't think it was an inside job by Lord Dunmore. This whole conflict was some plot to, wear out Virginia so it couldn't fight against the colonies. I think it was meant to unify the colonies and get kind of like a patriotic thing. Like, yeah, Virginia's all together. We agree we want to protect all this land, right? Yeah, we're all on this equal footing again. And that didn't pan out at all because Lord Dunmore's War was a distraction. It was a distraction for Mr. Murray himself, Governor Dunmore, because while he was off fighting this war, securing West Virginia, all of the people that were opposed to him just met behind his back and got more and more seditious. So that's the story of Lord Dunmore's War. It is very important to the course of the American Revolution because the Treaty of Fort Charlotte really kind of numbs large-scale indigenous involvement in the war, at least in the early phases. There will be talks as early as 1775. Dunmore kind of at the end of his meeting at Camp Charlotte had told the Shawnee, hey, this isn't finalized. This is more of a temporary measure. We'll talk more at Fort Pitt next spring. Well, next spring came around and the Shawnee show up at Fort Pitt. Hey, where's Dunmore? Oh, we kicked him out. What? Oh yeah, we kicked him out of the freaking continent. This is now the United States of America, baby. Although technically the declaration was a year after. So then that went through a series of negotiations between United States of America commissioners with the Shawnee and the Mingo and the Delaware, and it didn't really go anywhere. Didn't end well. There was a term reached with the Delaware, but it wasn't until 1778, the Treaty of Fort Pitt. By that point, the Shawnee had returned to raiding the frontier widespread. They were getting supplies and getting support from British forces much deeper into the Ohio country and places like Fort Detroit, Michigan. And I can be here all day talking because it never ended. The Indian Wars just never ended, one after another. It just bleeds into itself. But Lord Dunmore's War does give us a very interesting look into the British colonies on the cusp of revolution. What's the situation? There were things going on that were not directly involved in the revolution. There was still some sort of semblance of life going on, trying to the revolution, that's not happening. It's, trying to, no, it's not actually happening. Hey, look, we have all this other stuff happening. So it's interesting. It was a distraction, maybe just not this malicious distraction. It was more of a unintended distraction. I don't know. I'm not good with summarizing these things, am I? I'm good at going in details. I'm not good with trying to tie a bow on these historical events because when you really deal with frontier history, it's really hard to try to find a nice sweet spot because you just know, yeah, there's just going to be more and more endless violence that happens in the ensuing years. It doesn't stop. But definitely check out the history of Lord Dunmore's War. It's this brief conflict in 1774 that had big consequences for shaping the beginnings of the American Revolution, really giving the states some of their shapes, decided land disputes that would be inherited by the United States and would go on for several more decades. So it's very important for Virginia. It's very important for the course of the Revolution. And it's just cool. History's cool. I like talking about this stuff. It's fun. And with that, I think we're going to wind down our stream. That's all I got tonight. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments section down below all the facts I got wrong because I'm doing this live. If you want to watch a somewhat more factually correct account of Lord Dunmore's War, check out my episode of Construction Paper Battlefield on the Battle Point Pleasant, which keep in mind, the Battle Point Pleasant, which some consider to be the first true battle of the Revolutionary War, occurred 250 years ago today. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button down below. If you want to follow us on our future adventures, be it here in the room where I do these live streams, or when we go on the road and actually explore historic locations, be sure to subscribe here to Read Out Productions on TubeU, as well on the Green page. We got channels on both of there. And if you want to go the extra mile in support of me, you can join the Garrison. This is our membership program on Ko-fi. We call it the Garrison, as you help us fortify the preservation of history one step at a time. And by joining the Garrison, you do get access to a few additional bonuses. You get access to select scripts for some of my larger projects. You have access to what I call the digital postcards, which are kind of behind the scenes photographs. You get access to deleted scenes. And actually, I'm going to start doing short releases. What I'm going to do now, I just did today for the Garrison members. You might recall them trip tapes. I was posting them. They were kind of like gag reels from all of the journeys we've taken to document history. I'm going to start doing them exclusively for the Garrison. So the new trip tapes, if you want to see all the goofy stuff that happened behind the scenes when we went down to the Shenandoah Valley to document the Bedford Boys, the D-Day Memorial, the Battle of Newmarket, and Jackson's home and grave. If you want to see the goofy stuff that happened behind the scenes, you join the Garrison and you get to see trip tapes in that gag reel. So thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story about Lord Dunmore's War, the last colonial American war. Because after this, the United States of America is born. It's the last conflict the British American colonies were directly involved with before they formed the United States of America. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.
We will really from the hillside, walk together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys, and really once again.
You know, it's said that the murder of Cornstalk placed a curse upon Point Pleasant. And some say that is what Mothman was linked to. So there's a whole Cornstalk curse in the community of Point Pleasant, supposedly in the folklore. Or it could be relating to the Battle of Point Pleasant. So that's the Mothman. That's the Mothman title for in this whole story.